The immigrant janitor returned a lost wallet, shocked to learn it held keys to his dream. Literally and figuratively, Alejandro Vega's calloused hands trembled as he knelt on the floor of the university hallway, his mop temporarily forgotten beside him as he stared at the worn leather wallet that had fallen from someone's pocket. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across his weary face, a face that had aged beyond its 42 years from struggle and disappointment. "Not mine to keep," he whispered to himself in accented English, though the emptiness of the hallway at 2 a.m. meant no one was there to hear him. 6 years in America, and still the weight of his decision to leave Ecuador pressed down on him like an invisible boulder. 6 years of sending whatever money he could save back to his wife, Elena, and their daughter, Lucia. 6 years of cleaning other people's messes while his own dreams collected dust. 6 years of night shifts at Brighton University, mopping floors where students walked, learning things he could only imagine. Alejandro carefully opened the wallet, looking for identification. No cash inside, just cards, a student ID, and a set of keys on a small ring. The ID belonged to Dr. Marcus Reed, Department of Architecture, a professor, not a student. The photo showed a man about Alejandro's age, but with a confident smile that Alejandro hadn't worn in years. He slipped the wallet into his uniform pocket. He would turn it into security at the end of his shift, as he always did with lost items. His mother had raised him right, back in their small village outside Quito. "Your character is what you do when no one is watching," she would say. Even now, with rent due and Elena's voice on their last call sounding more strained than usual, taking anything wasn't an option. The mop made soft swishing sounds against the marble floor as Alejandro continued his work, the rhythm as familiar to him as his own heartbeat. Sometimes in moments like these, alone in the grand hallways of the architecture building, he allowed himself to remember. Before America, before the economic collapse that had devastated his construction business back home, before his dreams of designing buildings had been traded for the reality of cleaning them. As his shift ended and morning painted the sky in gentle strokes of pink and gold, Alejandro made his way to the campus security office. The guard at the desk, Mike, greeted him with a nod. After 3 years of Alejandro's night shifts, they had developed a quiet friendship of few words but mutual respect. "Found something?" Mike asked, setting down his coffee. "Wallet. Professor in architecture," Alejandro replied, placing it on the counter. Mike opened it and whistled low. "Dr. Reed's wallet. He's probably freaking out. Guy's always losing stuff." He typed something into his computer. "He's got an 8 a.m. class today. Probably already on campus. Want me to call him to come get it?" Alejandro shook his head. "I take it." "Which building?" Mike raised an eyebrow. "You sure? You must be tired after your shift." "Is no problem," Alejandro insisted. It wasn't entirely selfless. He'd always been curious about the inside of the Hoffman building, the newest and most impressive structure on campus, where most architecture classes were held. In 3 years, he'd never been assigned to clean it. "Suite 305, Mike said after checking the computer. "You're a good man, Alejandro." The morning air was crisp as Alejandro walked across the awakening campus. Students hurried past him, some still half asleep, others vibrant with morning energy. None of them looked at him, the invisible man in the gray janitor's uniform. He was part of the background, like the trees or the benches. The Hoffman building loomed ahead, a stunning achievement of glass and sustainable materials that seemed to capture the sunlight and transform it. Alejandro paused for a moment just to look at it, feeling the familiar ache in his chest. In another life, he might have designed something like this. Inside, the building hummed with activity. Alejandro checked the directory and made his way to the 3rd floor. Suite 305 had a nameplate, Dr. Marcus Reed, Chair of Sustainable Urban Design. The door was open, and inside a man was frantically searching through drawers, muttering to himself. Alejandro knocked gently on the doorframe. "Excuse me, Professor Reed?" The man looked up, his face a mask of stress that immediately shifted to hope when he saw the uniform. "Please tell me you found a wallet." Alejandro nodded, reaching into his pocket. "In hallway. Building D. Last night." The relief on the professor's face was immediate and profound. He crossed the room in 3 quick strides. "You have no idea what this means. I've been tearing the place apart since I realized it was missing." He took the wallet, quickly confirming its contents with nimble fingers. "Everything's here. Thank you, Mr. Vega. Alejandro Vega." "Mr. Vega. I can't thank you enough." The professor's eyes, Alejandro noticed, were kind behind his fashionable glasses. He extended his hand, and Alejandro hesitated only briefly before shaking it. Can I offer you a reward? There's no cash in there, but the keys alone, no reward. Alejandro cut in, perhaps too quickly. Is right thing? Professor Reed studied him for a moment, and Alejandro fought the urge to look away. He was accustomed to being overlooked, not examined. Well, at least let me buy you a coffee. I was about to grab one before my class. When Alejandro began to decline, the professor added, Please, I insist. It's the least I can do. There was something in the man's tone that made it difficult to refuse. An earnestness that reminded Alejandro of his father. Okay. Coffee. 10 minutes later, they sat in the building's atrium cafe. Alejandro acutely aware of his uniform among the stylish students and faculty. The coffee was better than the break room sludge he was used to. So, Mr. Vega, how long have you worked at Brighton? Professor Reed asked. 3 years. Night shift. And before that? The question was casual, but it struck a nerve. Before that. Before America. Before everything fell apart. Alejandro stared into his coffee. Ecuador. I had small construction company. Construction? The professor leaned forward slightly. Building houses? Houses, small buildings. I designed too. Not just build. The words slipped out before Alejandro could catch them, and he felt his cheeks warm. Who was he to claim to be a designer to a man with a doctorate and a nameplate? But Professor Reed didn't laugh. Instead, his eyes lit with interest. You're a designer? Did you study architecture? Alejandro shook his head. 2 years only, at university in Quito. Then my father died. Had to work. He hadn't talked about this in years, not even with Elena. The pain of abandoned dreams was something he kept locked away. Self-taught designers often have the most innovative approaches, Reed said thoughtfully. They're not constrained by academic convention. Alejandro gave a small disbelieving laugh. Maybe, but no degree, no job. Not necessarily. Reed took a sip of his coffee. The department is launching a community initiative. We're looking for people with practical building experience to help mentor students on a real-world project in underserved areas. I am Janitor, Alejandro reminded him. You're a builder and designer who currently works as a janitor, Reed corrected. There's a difference. He glanced at his watch. I have to get to class, but I'd like to continue this conversation. Are you free tomorrow? Alejandro blinked in confusion. I work nights. Late afternoon then? 4 o'clock? Same place? The professor was already standing, gathering his things. Why? The question escaped before Alejandro could stop it. Reed paused, his expression serious. Because you returned my wallet when you could have easily taken the keys inside. Because you refused a reward. Because you understand both design and construction. And because sometimes, Mr. Vega, the right person comes along at exactly the right moment. He handed Alejandro a business card. 4 o'clock tomorrow. If you're interested. Before Alejandro could respond, Professor Reed was gone, swallowed by the stream of students entering the atrium. Alejandro sat alone at the table, the untouched half of his coffee growing cold, the business card hot in his palm like a live coal. Sleep eluded Alejandro that day. In the small apartment he shared with 2 other men, both also immigrants, one from Guatemala, one from El Salvador, he lay on his narrow bed staring at the ceiling, the professor's card on the table beside him. His roommates were out working their day jobs, leaving him alone with thoughts too loud for the quiet room. He called Elena during what was her lunch break at the small shop where she worked. You sound strange, Alejo, she said after they had exchanged their usual check-ins about health and Lucia's schooling. Did something happen? How could he explain the feeling that had been growing in him since the morning? The dangerous spark of hope that he had worked so hard to extinguish over the years? I met someone, he said finally. A professor. He talked about a project. Maybe using my experience. Your design experience? The excitement in Elena's voice was immediate, and it made his throat tight. She had always believed in his talent more than he did himself. Maybe. I don't know. Probably nothing. It's not nothing if it made you call me in the middle of your sleep time, she said gently. Go to the meeting, Alejo. What can it hurt? What indeed, except the fragile equilibrium he had established? The careful management of expectations that allowed him to wake each evening, put on his uniform, and clean without drowning in regret. I'll go, he promised, because he could never deny her anything. The following afternoon found him standing outside the Atrium Cafe, dressed in his only non-work clothes. Dark jeans and a button-up shirt Elena had given him 2 Christmases ago, still crisp from disuse. He'd taken a bus to a different part of the city to find a barbershop that charged less than the ones near campus. Getting his first proper haircut in months. Professor Reed was already at a table, typing on a laptop. He looked up as Alejandro approached, and his smile seemed genuinely pleased. "Mr. Vega, I wasn't sure you'd come." "Alejandro," he corrected, sitting down stiffly. "Mr. Vega is too formal." "Then I'm Marcus." He closed his laptop. "Thank you for coming. I've been thinking about our conversation." Over the next hour, Marcus explained the community project. Brighton University had received funding to design and build sustainable housing units in Riverside, one of the city's most neglected neighborhoods. The catch was that the buildings needed to be both environmentally sound and culturally appropriate for the largely immigrant population. "The students have the technical knowledge," Marcus explained, "but most have never held a hammer. And none understand the practical realities of the communities we're trying to serve." "And you think I can help with this?" Alejandro asked, still skeptical. "I know you can." Marcus pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. "This is a paid position, part-time to start, working around your current schedule. You would be classified as a community design consultant." Alejandro opened the folder. The salary listed was modest but significantly more per hour than his janitorial position. There was also mention of possible tuition credits. "I don't understand," he said, finally looking up. "You don't know me." Marcus leaned back in his chair. "Sometimes in academia, we get lost in theory and forget the purpose of what we do. Buildings aren't just designs on paper. They're homes for real people. The students need someone who understands that." He paused. "And frankly, I've been looking for the right person for months. When I saw how carefully you handled something that wasn't yours, even when no one was watching, well, that told me something important about your character." Alejandro's hands trembled slightly as he closed the folder. "I need to think." "Of course," Marcus nodded. "Take the weekend. But there's one more thing." He reached into his bag and pulled out a key ring, the same one that had been in the wallet. "These aren't just any keys. One opens a storage room in the Hoffman building basement. Inside are the architectural models and drawings from my father's firm. He passed away last year." Marcus turned the key ring over in his hand, his expression softening with memory. He was old school, believed in drafting by hand, making physical models. "The university has allowed me to use the space as a workshop for special projects." He held out the keys. "If you're interested in the position, meet me there Monday at noon. If not, no hard feelings. You can leave the keys with campus security." Alejandro stared at the outstretched hand. "Why trust me with these?" "You already had them once and returned them," Marcus said simply. "I think they might have found the right hands." The weekend passed in a blur of conflicting emotions. Alejandro worked his usual shifts, cleaning with mechanical efficiency while his mind raced. He called Elena twice, longer calls than their budget usually allowed. "It sounds like an opportunity sent from God," she said. Why are you hesitating? How could he explain his fear? That hoping again after so long might break him if things went wrong? That he had grown almost comfortable in his invisibility? By Monday morning, he still hadn't decided. He slept fitfully, then woke and stared at the keys on his nightstand. The storage room key was larger than the others, old-fashioned brass that spoke of solid doors and permanent things. At 11:45, his feet made the decision his mind couldn't. He found himself walking toward the Hoffman building, the keys clutched in his palm. The basement was cool and quiet, a maze of utility rooms and storage spaces. The key fit perfectly into the lock of room B15. Inside, the lights flickered on to reveal what could only be described as a treasure trove for anyone who loved architecture. Shelves lined the walls, filled with intricate models of buildings. Tables held rolls of blueprints. One corner housed a proper drafting table, angled toward the room's only window, a small rectangular opening that allowed a thin shaft of natural light to enter. "My father's sanctuary," Marcus said from the doorway, making Alejandro jump. "Sorry, didn't mean to startle you." Alejandro gestured to the room, words failing him. His fingers itched to examine the models, to unroll the blueprints, to touch the drafting tools arranged with such care. John Reed was something of a legend in sustainable design before it was fashionable. Marcus explained, stepping into the room. He believed architecture should work with the environment, not against it, and that buildings should reflect the souls of the people who would inhabit them. He walked to one of the models, a community center with sweeping lines that somehow reminded Alejandro of the mountains around his village. "He would have liked you, I think." "These are..." Alejandro trailed off, overwhelmed. "Inspiring?" Marcus suggested. "They're meant to be, and they're meant to be used, not locked away." That's why I wanted you to see this room. If you take the position, this space comes with it. You can use it to work with the students or for your own projects after hours. Alejandro turned in a slow circle, taking in the room again. A space for creation. A space where he wouldn't be invisible. The project starts next week, Marcus continued. The first phase is community consultation. We need to understand what the residents of Riverside actually need, not what we think they need. I live near Riverside, Alejandro said quietly. Many immigrants there. They will not trust students or professors easily. Exactly why we need you. Marcus checked his watch. I have a faculty meeting in 15 minutes. Take some time here if you'd like. Think about it. The keys are yours until you decide. After Marcus left, Alejandro stood motionless in the center of the room, breathing in the faint smell of paper and wood and possibility. Then slowly he moved to the drafting table. The surface was clean, waiting. In a nearby drawer, he found pencils, rulers, compasses, tools he hadn't held in years. Almost reverently, he took out a pencil and a sheet of paper. His hand hovered over the blank page for a long moment. Then with a deep breath, he began to draw. Hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence as muscle memory returned. The simple outline of a small house, the kind he had designed dozens of times in Ecuador. Nothing fancy, just clean lines, functional spaces, a careful consideration of light and air. He lost track of time, the familiar act of creation absorbing him completely. When he finally looked up, the thin shaft of sunlight had moved across the floor. He had filled 3 pages with sketches. They weren't perfect, his skills were rusty, his techniques outdated, but they were his. For the first time in 6 years, he had designed something. The decision was already made, he realized. Had perhaps been made the moment he picked up the wallet from the floor. That evening, before his shift, Alejandro called Elena. When she answered, he didn't begin with their usual greetings. I'm taking the position, he said, his voice steadier than it had been in years. It might be nothing, but it might be something. It's already something, Elena replied, and he could hear the smile in her voice. It's a beginning. The next few weeks unfolded in a whirlwind of change. Alejandro kept his night job but reduced his hours, using his days to work on the Riverside project. The first community meeting was held in a church basement, with a sparse attendance of suspicious residents eyeing the university team warily. They think we're here to gentrify the neighborhood. Marcus muttered to Alejandro as they set up chairs. Push them out with fancy new buildings they can't afford. Let me talk to them, Alejandro said. When the meeting officially began, he stepped forward and began speaking in Spanish, explaining the project in terms of practical benefits. Better insulation meant lower heating bills. Communal spaces could provide safe places for children. Sustainable materials would mean healthier homes. He saw the shift in the room as he spoke. The slight relaxation of crossed arms, the tentative nods. When he finished and opened the floor for comments, hands went up. Real concerns were voiced. Would current residents have priority for the new units? Would there be disruption during construction? Could the designs accommodate multi-generational families? Alejandro translated faithfully, adding context where needed. Many here send money home like me. He explained to Marcus and the students. They need affordable rent to do this, and many have parents or grandparents living with them. American apartments are not designed for this. By the end of the meeting, the atmosphere had transformed. People lingered, sharing stories of housing challenges and dreams for their community. 3 more residents signed up to join the advisory committee, and Alejandro had filled pages of notes, not just technical requirements, but human ones. The grandmother who needed level access for her wheelchair, the family whose cultural traditions required specific kitchen layouts, the night shift workers who needed sound insulation to sleep during the day. As they packed up, Marcus clapped a hand on Alejandro's shoulder. That was remarkable. You connected with them in a way none of us could have. Alejandro shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise but secretly pleased. I understand their lives because I live the same life. And that understanding is exactly what this project needed. Marcus hesitated, then added, the department has another community meeting next week, a different project, historical preservation in the downtown area. Would you be interested in attending? Just to observe. The invitation was casual, but Alejandro recognized it for what it was. Another door opening. Yes, he said, I would like that. Days stretched into weeks and weeks into months. The Riverside project progressed from community consultation to design development. Alejandro found himself spending more and more time in the basement room, working alongside architecture students who initially viewed him with curiosity, but quickly came to respect his practical knowledge and creative problem solving. Mr. Vega, can you look at this roof design? A student named Tara would ask. I'm not sure it will work with the materials we've specified. Or Jason struggling with a floor plan. How would you arrange this kitchen for a family that cooks together? My family always ordered takeout, so I don't really know. Alejandro's confidence grew with each interaction. He began to bring in his own sketches, designs that incorporated both technical knowledge from the students and cultural understanding from the community. Marcus encouraged him to present these ideas at project meetings, where they were often met with enthusiasm. You have a natural talent for human-centered design, Marcus told him after a particularly successful presentation. Have you considered furthering your education? Formalizing your skills? Alejandro laughed softly. At my age, with my English, age is just a number. And your English is perfectly functional. It will improve with time and practice. Marcus leaned against the drafting table. Brighton has a continuing education program. Classes in the evenings. You could start with a few courses, see how it goes. The seed was planted and Alejandro couldn't help but let it take root in his imagination. Student, a word he had never thought would apply to him again. That night, during his call with Elena, he mentioned the idea hesitantly, expecting practical objections about money or time. Instead, she was quiet for a long moment. Lucia asked me yesterday when you were coming home. She said finally, I didn't know what to tell her. The words hit him like a physical blow. I am working to bring you both here. He said, the familiar explanation tasting bitter on his tongue after 6 years of repetition. I know, mi amor, but perhaps, she paused, perhaps there is another way. If you are becoming established there, building a career again, the implication hung between them. Instead of him returning to Ecuador, they could join him in America. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. To have his family whole again, but in a place still foreign to him in many ways. It would be difficult, he said carefully. Expensive, complicated with visas. Life is already difficult. Elena replied with the pragmatism he had always loved in her. At least this difficulty would have us together at the end. They talked long into the night, weighing possibilities that had seemed unthinkable just months before. By morning, a new plan had taken shape. Tentative, fraught with obstacles, but a plan nonetheless. Elena would begin the process of applying for visas. Alejandro would continue with the project, explore educational opportunities, and save every penny possible. One step at a time, Elena reminded him as they finally said goodbye. Just like building a house, the Riverside project entered its final design phase as spring bloomed across campus. Alejandro had reduced his janitorial hours even further, now working primarily on the project during days and taking 2 evening classes. English composition for non-native speakers, and introduction to computer-aided design. The basement room had become his second home. He'd been given permission to use it whenever he needed, and often stayed late into the evening, working on class assignments or refining designs for the project. It was there that Marcus found him one night in April, surrounded by sketch paper and technical drawings. Working late again? Marcus asked, setting down a cardboard tray with 2 coffee cups. I thought I might find you here. Alejandro accepted the coffee gratefully. Final project for CAD class. I am still slow with the computer, but making progress. Marcus pulled up a chair. That's actually why I wanted to talk to you. The department has been reviewing the community consultant position. Your contribution to the Riverside project has exceeded all expectations. Alejandro looked down, uncomfortable as always with direct praise. The students did the real work. The students learned from you as much as from their professors, Marcus countered. Your practical knowledge, your community connections, your design sensibility, these things can't be taught in a classroom. He took a folder from his bag. The university wants to extend and expand your position, full-time with benefits, and ... He paused for emphasis. Tuition remission for a certain number of credits per semester. Alejandro stared at the folder. Full-time? As a design consultant and community liaison for department projects. And if you choose to pursue a degree program, the schedule can be adjusted to accommodate your classes. Marcus smiled. In other words, the university wants to invest in you, Alejandro. The words echoed in the quiet room. Invest in you. When was the last time anyone besides Elena had believed in his future that way? The cunt. There's something else, Marcus continued, reaching into his bag again. The Riverside project presentation is next month. The mayor will be there, along with community leaders and potential investors for future projects. He handed Alejandro a formal invitation. You'll be presenting alongside the student team. Alejandro took the thick cream-colored card with its embossed university seal. His name was printed on it. Alejandro Vega, Community Design Consultant, I. My English, he began, is perfectly adequate for expressing your ideas. Marcus finished firmly. But you have 3 weeks to practice and I'm happy to help. That night, Alejandro didn't go to his apartment after leaving campus. Instead, he found himself walking through the Riverside neighborhood, past the vacant lot where the project's first building would soon break ground. He tried to imagine it completed, families moving in, children playing in the courtyard designed specifically with safety and community in mind. His phone buzzed with a message from Elena. She had sent a photo of Lucia, now 12, holding up a science project ribbon. His daughter's smile was radiant, her eyes so like his own, bright with pride. She was growing up without him there to see it. The full-time position would mean enough money to finally bring them to America. The benefits would include health insurance that could cover them all. The tuition remission would allow him to work toward a degree while earning a living. It wasn't the life he had planned. It wasn't Ecuador, wasn't the business he had built and lost, but it was a life with dignity, with purpose. A life where he could use his hands and mind to create, not just to clean. The next day, he accepted the position. The night of the presentation arrived with a flurry of nervous energy. The event was held in the grand atrium of the Hoffman Building, transformed for the evening with display boards showing the project's evolution, scale models on pedestals, and a multimedia presentation area. Alejandro stood slightly apart, adjusting the tie that Marcus had insisted on lending him for the occasion. The suit had been his own purchase, his first in America, carefully selected with Elena's guidance over a video call to a small shop that catered to Latino clientele. "You look distinguished," Tara told him, approaching with a glass of water. "Like a proper architect. Not an architect yet," he reminded her with a small smile. "Still learning. We're all still learning." She handed him the water. "But you taught us the most important thing, how to listen to the people we're designing for." The presentation went better than Alejandro could have hoped. The student team presented the technical aspects with polished professionalism. When his turn came, Alejandro spoke simply but passionately about the community's involvement, the cultural considerations that had shaped the design, and the potential impact on residents' lives. "This project is not just about buildings," he said, his accent still pronounced but his words clear and measured. "It is about creating homes where families can grow, where communities can support each other, where people can build new lives without losing connection to their past." He saw Marcus in the audience, nodding encouragement. Beside him sat the Dean of the School of Architecture, who had recently approved Alejandro's application to the bachelor's degree program with advanced standing for his prior education and experience. After the formal presentation, the reception buzzed with conversation. Alejandro found himself surrounded by people asking questions, offering congratulations, discussing potential applications of the design principles to other communities. "Mr. Vega," a voice called, and he turned to see the mayor approaching with Marcus. "Impressive work. The city is very interested in expanding this model to other neighborhoods if the pilot proves successful." "Thank you, Mayor. That would be wonderful," Alejandro replied, shaking the offered hand. "Dr. Reed tells me you'll be joining the degree program in the fall." The mayor continued, "The city has an internship program for architecture students focusing on urban renewal. You should consider applying when you're eligible." Another door opening. Another possibility that would have seemed laughable just months ago. As the evening wound down, Alejandro found a quiet moment with Marcus near the scale model of the project's centerpiece, a community building with elements that subtly honored the diverse cultural backgrounds of Riverside's residents. "Thank you," Alejandro said simply. "For everything." Marcus shook his head. "I just returned a wallet. You did all the rest." "Not true. You saw me when I was invisible. You gave me a chance when no one else would look twice." "I recognize talent and character," Marcus corrected. "The university is getting the better end of this deal, believe me." He glanced around the room at the students gathered in animated conversation, at the community members examining the models with proprietary interest. "You've built more than buildings here, Alejandro. You've built bridges." 3 months later, on a sweltering August afternoon, Alejandro stood in the arrival area of the international terminal, a bouquet of flowers clutched in one hand, his heart pounding against his ribs like a trapped bird. The door slid open, and passengers from the Quito flight began streaming through. He scanned each face anxiously until, there, Elena, looking both exhausted and radiant in a blue dress he'd never seen before. And beside her, a young girl. No, not so young anymore, with his eyes and Elena's determined chin. "Papa!" Lucia broke away from her mother and ran toward him. 6 years dissolved in an instant as he dropped the flowers and caught his daughter in his arms. lifting her off the ground, though she was nearly as tall as his shoulder now. Mi vida, he whispered into her hair, his voice breaking. Mi corazón. Elena reached them, tears streaming freely down her face. When he finally managed to release Lucia, he pulled his wife into his arms, breathing in the familiar scent of her, unchanged despite the years and miles that had separated them. "Welcome home," he said in Spanish, his voice thick with emotion. "We are home," Elena replied, touching his face as if to assure herself he was real. "Wherever you are, that is our home." Later that evening, after showing them the modest two-bedroom apartment he had rented near campus, close enough for him to walk to classes, with a good school district for Lucia, Alejandro took them to see the Riverside Project construction site. The foundation had been poured, and the framing was beginning to rise against the summer sky. "I helped design this," he told Lucia, his arm around her shoulders as they stood looking at the site. "And soon families will live here. Children like you will have a safe place to grow up. Will you design more buildings?" she asked, looking up at him with those familiar eyes that still took his breath away. "Yes," he said with a certainty that would have been impossible a year ago. "Many more, and someday if you want, you can help me." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows from the partial framework of what would become homes for dozens of families, Alejandro stood with his wife and daughter on either side of him, their hands linked together. The immigrant janitor who had returned a lost wallet had found something far more valuable in the process. Not just keys to a room filled with architectural treasures, but keys to a future he had stopped believing was possible. A future built not just of concrete and steel, but of connection, opportunity, and second chances. In the fading light, the skeletal outline of the building seemed to glow with promise. Much like the new life taking shape around him, its foundation solid, its possibilities soaring upward toward the endless sky.